These poor kids that are the girls pregnant before they're married cause the boys to get so stirred up passionately that they'll a girl.
I'm talking about a culture that attributes someone's amount of sexual experiences and someone's knowledge of sex, the way that someone dresses, the way that someone does their hair, the amount of makeup someone wears. They take all that and they attribute that to their worth.
Like, you can't go on a date with someone without a chaperone. You know, you can't kiss before you're married. You can't hold hands, like all the rules.
They don't teach men to respect women. Essentially, when you get married, you're taught that you own your wife. The ownership goes from the woman being owned by her father in many cases to being owned by you as the husband.
Shell thought that she was out being a cheerleader and, kind of dancing around there in a short skirt. She thought all these people in the crowd, all these guys, were getting excited about team spirit. And she had no clue how guys thought.
And how defrauding that was.
Courtship has become a catch-all phrase to describe something better than dating. It's the word used by people for everything they think boy-girl relationships should be, a wish list for how things should ideally unfold. The boy goes to the father, the boy courts the girl in safe family settings, boy and girl fall in love and the sun shines at their outdoor wedding, and this is all good. We should have high standards, we should be idealistic, but misguided idealism can make for a rather unpleasant collision with reality. Unfortunately, what looks good on paper doesn't always go as smoothly as planned in real life. Relationships are confusing, no matter what you call them. This was a statement made by former evangelical pastor Joshua Harris, who wrote the book I Kiss Dating Goodbye. Joshua Harris was a huge proponent in the courtship movement, with the release of his book in 1997. The term courtship is practiced in the Duggar family to find a spouse. It isn't anything new, as courtship has been around for centuries. It has, however, in recent years become more popularized due to the Duggars being the poster family and public advocates for it. With the Duggars being on reality TV, they have had the ability to influence millions, so it's no surprise that families across the nation have incorporated the concept of courtship into their family standards. In Jinger Duggar's new book, Becoming Free Indeed, she expresses deep regret for her role and participation in advocating for something that she now feels can be damaging. In this video, we are going to discuss the topic of courtship, specifically from Bill Gothards' teachings, which was enforced in the Duggar household and promoted over the years. In this episode, you will hear from both sides of the coin. You will hear reasons as to why the Duggars believe that courtship is the proper way to find a life partner, and you will hear the opposition from others who argue that the courtship and purity movement is dangerous and damaging. At the end of the video, upon hearing both sides, please weigh in and let us know where you stand on the topic. Are you pro-courtship, against it, or somewhere in the middle? In 2014, the four oldest Duggar girls, Jana, Jill, Jessa, and Jinger, wrote a book titled Growing Up Duggar, It's All About Relationships. In that book, they wrote at length about their views and standards regarding courtship, dating, and marriage. Growing up in the IBLP with Bill Gothards as their leader, they detail why courtship is important and how they have implemented his teachings on courtship into their lives. They begin their chapter on relationships with the following, quote, "If marriage is in God's future plan for any of us, we desire for our relationship with our future husbands to develop through courtship, rather than today's norm of dating. But before a girl considers thinking about or liking teenage boys, she must first focus on her relationship with her parents. Here's the bottom line. The relationship a girl has with her dad often influences how she will relate to boys. Girls want to believe their dads love them and will protect them. When they don't feel that, they often go searching for those things from guys. This can lead to unwise decisions, which in turn bring a host of consequences and painful memories. One young woman who wrote to us desperately wanted her father to at least check out the boys who wanted to date her, but he didn't. When a boy came to pick her up at her home, her dad would send her on her way with the words, "Have a good time." Maybe that seems like every teenage girl's dream, a dad who lets her do whatever she wants, go out with any guy she wants today, whatever. But when we reached out to mentor this girl, she told us that as she and the boy of the week would drive away, she might have been smiling on the outside, but inside she felt empty, worthless. not even important enough for her father to bother checking out the boy who was taking her out.
When God worked out the ideal society, He did it for His own people. He said, now here's the ideal. If you want an ideal society in the world, here it is. And it all fit together. But one of the things in that ideal society was that the father was responsible for the purity of the daughter up to the point of marriage. And he had to come forth and bring forth proofs that she was pure. And if not, his name would be desecrated there in the whole society. That was his responsibility and very clearly defined. But fathers today are not taking that responsibility of protecting the purity of their daughters. Many fathers today are not even aware of what's happening in the lives of their daughters. And their daughters aren't telling them, and they're not asking. Recently talked to one father, and he wanted to know if there's any way to help his daughter. She was beginning to turn away from Christianity, getting involved in drink and wrong friendship. I said, well, first question, has your daughter become physically involved with this fella or any other fella? The father's immediate response was, I don't think so. I hope not. I don't think so. The problem is that he didn't know the facts.
To help daughters improve their relationships with their fathers, the Duggar girls encourage them to follow certain steps. The first step they encourage is that daughters pray for their fathers. Quote, "We encourage you to pray about your relationship with your dad and ask God to give him those characteristics he's missing or to give him insights that will help improve his relationship with you." After the daughter takes this initial step by praying for her dad, they then advise that she do the following. Quote, "After you've prayed for your father, then do your part. Show respect when your dad makes hard decisions. Don't argue or pout when he sets guidelines for your family. And watch for opportunities to spend time with your dad and talk with him, knowing that close communication can strengthen your relationship."
So in 2003, 87% of parents said they felt really close to their children and felt that they had a really good relationship. A few years later, only 75% said that they could actually talk about things that mattered with their kids. So we're going to talk a little bit about why is that important that we develop a good relationship with our parents, because God has given us our parents. And you have the parents that He specifically designed for you. And, so we are to, I think, a lot of children don't have that close, walk with their parents and aren't able to share their heart with their parents, and they go on and they're doing it with a lot of sibling or friends and stuff. And then they're getting advice from their friends, which isn't the wisest thing to do.
And a real sign of maturity in a girl is whenever they can learn to communicate with their parents openly and honestly about anything that's on their mind any day of the week. And so it's not to say that it's really easy, but it does get easier as you start doing that and approaching your parents and talking with them. And the blessings that come and the sense of freedom is insurmountable.
Bill Gothards' teachings make it very clear that one cannot have a successful marriage if they do not have a good relationship with their parents. Having a good relationship with God and then your parents is the foundation to a happy, successful, long-lasting marriage. Once one has mastered having a great relationship with God and then parents, as well as siblings and friends, they can proceed towards being open to courtship. In their book, the Duggars write that when girls reach the age of 12, they are considered young women and begin to have conversations about boys with their parents. They begin their chapter on courtship with the following. Quote, "About the time we entered our teenage years, Dad told us a story about a girl he went to school with in elementary and junior high school who was boy crazy. He said she would have a boyfriend for a week or so, and then something would happen and she would get upset and break it off with him. Then, a few days later, she would have a new boyfriend, and then she would switch to another, then another. Dad said this cycle went on for years. Sadly enough, when this girl finally got married, it didn't last long, and that same pattern of discontent, insecurity, and self-centeredness that had affected her dating also affected her marriage."
we need to understand that dating is not a function in Scripture. You can't find dating in Scripture. And the more we get into this, the more we see that one of the most important decisions for every young person to make and every parent to understand is the fallacy of dating. Dating is an exercise in divorce because it's not based on commitment. It's based on having a good time and then leave for somebody else to have a good time with them. And the young people today that are making a difference in the world are those that have understood this and have traded in immature, unscriptural dating for the mature scriptural concept of courtship.
The Duggar girls explain that upon mentoring many young girls, they discovered that so many of them loved the idea of being in love. They discovered that many young girls fell in love with the idea of marriage, and they attributed these ideals to romance novels. The Duggar girls explain that these girls fell victim to these thoughts because they read romance novels. They write, "This is one of the greatest dangers of romance novels. They paint a picture of an unrealistic, unobtainable relationship. It's the same thing pornography does to men. Viewing explicit content gives them a distorted view of women that leads them down the path of immorality and guilt. Men who feed their minds on porn start looking at women as objects to fulfill their out-of-control desires instead of looking at women as someone to be protected, loved, and cared for. They become self-centered, and when they start a relationship, their focus is on what they can get out of it instead of what they can put into it. This mindset eventually leads to the destruction of what could have been a fulfilling marriage. And yet, when a girl reads romance novels, she's doing something very similar, drawing perfectionistic romantic pictures into her mind of what she thinks marriage is. Soon, she's longing for this ideal marriage that she had created in her mind, and she does everything she can to get it."
Another thing is try and stay away from a lot of the romance novels, things like that. It stirs up sensual desires in our hearts, which cannot be righteously fulfilled. And for a lot of us girls, it's not healthy, and it's almost as bad as what pornography is to guys. And when we're dreaming and, oh, this perfect Prince Charming that's going to sweep me off my feet someday, and when no perfect guy exists out there. And every guy is going to have struggles just like us girls have. But we need to look at ourselves, examine ourselves, and realize that the type of guy that is going to be looking for, the type of guy that we want to marry, what kind of girl is he going to be looking for?
To help steer girls away from these dangers, the Duggar girls introduce the concept of the purity ring. In this chapter, they go into detail the benefits of the purity culture and why it is important to follow and set it as a standard. They begin with the purity ring, writing, "One way our parents have helped us understand the principles designed to keep us pure is by giving all of us older girls purity rings. The rings were special gifts we received when the four of us were in our early teenage years. To each of us, the ring has a fourfold purpose. First, it's a symbol of our commitment to keep ourselves physically pure as we wait for the one God intends for us to marry. Second, it symbolizes our desire to involve our parents in our decision of a life partner. Third, our ring reminds us to pray for the man God would have us marry and to guard our own heart so that one day we can share it fully with him. Fourth, it's a reminder that God is the true fulfiller of all of our desires, and also a reminder to cherish our relationship with him."
Your spouse is a gift from God. Marriage is compared to salvation, and salvation is a free gift. Marriage is a gift. It's a wonderful thing. But God wants that package to be intact under the Christmas tree. So that means emotionally, he wants you to guard your heart and love him first. That also means when you begin a relationship, you don't need to be feeling your package. You need to be keeping your heart and your mind pure and seeking to love God and to be content. Because you know what? If you can't be content being single, You're going to have a hard time being content in a relationship. And if you're in a relationship and you're not content until you can get married, when you get married, you're going to have a hard time being content. Because with the wonderful freedoms God has in marriage, there is responsibility. And God has so much for you to accomplish in these single years. Use them for Him. Use them to the fullest so that you won't have regrets.
As they step into the season where they find themselves attracted to the opposite gender, the girls detail how important it is to fight off temptation and censoring wandering thoughts that could lead them into sin. They write, Romans 13:14 says, "To make not provisions for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof." That means we're to avoid reading romance novels, teen magazines, and watching TV shows and movies that will stir up these sensual drives.
The wise father would be very, very wise in removing the TV set from that home, to take out those things that are temptations, that are potentials for damaging the spirit of other members in your family. I'm thankful personally for the day that my parents stopped taking the newspaper. It was just a constant drain on my time, and the things I began to more and more read in it weren't helping me spiritually.
The girls then address the most important step in finding a life partner, according to their standards, and that is to involve the parents. Gothards teaches about this component in his seminars. He makes it a point and stresses the necessity for sons and daughters to involve their parents and follow the orders, guidance, and advice of their parents regarding courtship, no matter what.
Say to your daughter, do not discuss marriage. And fellas, don't discuss marriage with a girl. Do not even say to her, I love you, until you go to that father. In fact, we're just talking about the whole idea here of courtship is you don't even focus on a girl and pay special attention until you get the freedom from the father. And we're seeing some incredible marriages come together being done the right way.
The girls write that if a guy is interested in them, that he must first go through their father, and that their father will ask him a host of questions. These are some of the questions their father, Jim Bob, would ask. 1. Is he a believer in Jesus? Does he know and love God? 2. Does he have a vision for his life of doing great things for God? 3. Is he free of all harmful addictions such as porn, alcohol, drugs, immorality, etc.? 4. Is he given to anger, lust, bitterness, greed, or envy? 5. Is he wise with his finances? 6. Does he love children? 7. Is he a man of character, showing initiative, creativity, diligence, enthusiasm, and wisdom? 8. Are both sets of parents giving their full and unreserved permission and blessing for their children to pursue this relationship? 9. Does he have similar convictions and standards to ours? 10. Has he been married or in a relationship before? If he has made a marriage vow to another woman, then he needs to keep that vow. 11. Is his passion in life for earthly money or for eternal riches and rewards? 12. Does he accept me just the way I am? 13. Could I say he loves God more than he loves me? Will he draw me closer to God? 14. Does he love me? If mom and dad agree that the young man has a heart for the Lord and a potential as a future spouse, then we will invite him to visit our family so we can get to know each other in our normal life group setting.
I'd like to challenge every one of you sons, every one of you daughters, and you parents to make a decision that I know would be to your benefit. That decision would be that you would upgrade dating to courtship. That means that rather than simply feeling that it's a normal thing to date around until you find the one that you think is the one for you, to say, I'm going to have friendships, I'm going to have activities, group activities, but as far as singling out one fella or one girl, that's not going to be unless the stage is set for courtship. We're not going to just go through the normal dating tragedies of our day, because our society is now structured in a way that is bringing devastation.
It's important to note that there are many rules, regulations, and prohibitions in place during this process. The potential couple are not allowed to be alone with each other under any circumstance. So if and when they begin courting, they are always in a group setting and around others who can keep a clear eye on them, which leads into the Duggars' next point in explaining the distinction between courting and dating and why courtship is better. They write, "Getting to know the special young man we're interested in within a family setting is one of the biggest differences in dating and courtship. A danger of modern dating is that it is typically two young people, alone, enjoying an activity. It's pretty easy for a young man to put on a show of good conduct during a romantic one-on-one date. Also, how a man treats his parents and siblings show us how he is likely to treat his own future family. You simply won't see that by spending time alone with him."
There is so much damage going on today in dating. And one of the things that amazes me the most is how little parents know about what their kids have gotten into, or what their teenagers are into right now. That's why this shocking question, have you done things that your parents don't know about yet? And almost every teenager I talk to has to hang their head and say yes. And when they tell their parents, parents are shocked. And that is why any parent who thinks you can, quote, trust a son or daughter out in dating today, you do not understand what's happening out there. I mean, that is an invitation to destruction. And I cannot believe why parents don't see that their teenagers are being destroyed and damaged. And then you wonder, how come they're pulling away from the family, pulling away from God, because they have done something they don't want you to know about, they feel so guilty about. And then you wonder, what's it all about? Because you encourage dating. And dating is unscriptural. Dating is wrong. Just plain wrong. It might have gone, a century ago when we had a Christian environment. But today, in the evil, vile, wicked world, when the normal is immorality, and the expected thing is premarital violations of God's standards.
The next distinction the Duggars discuss is accountability. They write, "Another difference between dating and courtship is accountability. When you're alone with a guy in a dating situation with no one else around to hold you accountable, it's easy to put yourself into physical and moral danger and give in to those emotions or sensual thoughts. God has created physical intimacy to be a wonderful wedding gift for pleasure and bonding and to procreate children. But if it is done prematurely or with multiple partners, the very thing that was created to bring joy can bring STDs. What could be worse than having to tell your potential future husband that not only did you not wait, but that you also have a severely painful STD that he will likely get if he marries you?"
And then I encourage you young men to read Proverbs chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7, because it does talk about the strange woman and how she's so beautiful, how she seems so irresistible. But then it also talks about the consequences of going down that path and pursuing that sensual woman that's immoral. It talks about how there's death, there's destruction, and matter of fact, I just before I left, I get these alerts, and it was a news alert, and it said how these sexually transmitted diseases are just going and getting out of control, and they're skyrocketing in America. What if you had sexual relations with someone before you're married, and then you ended up getting like HIV, and that relationship didn't work out, and then you went and you repented from that, and then you went and you found the one that you felt like that God wanted you to marry, and you got back on track in your life, and then you found out that you had HIV, and you had to tell the one that you were going to marry that if you marry me, you will get AIDS and you will die.
The Duggar girls continue their argument, writing, "Physical intimacy in marriage is pure, wholesome, and beautiful. Outside of marriage, it spreads disease, death, and destruction. A baby is a blessing, no matter how it is conceived, but it is a lot more difficult to raise as a single mom. A huge percentage of the guys who have gotten a girl pregnant do not take responsibility for the child or want to have anything to do with the girl once she is pregnant. You cannot get unpregnant. If you are pregnant, take responsibility and take care of yourself and your baby, and God will take care of you." Another point the Duggar girls make as to why courtship is the way to go is that they argue that dating may or may not have marriage as its goal, whereas courtship is intended for commitment and marriage. Quote, "Modern-day dating tends to revolve around a self-centered relationship that is all about me, what makes me feel good and who makes me happy, satisfied, and complete. You may feel good for a little while, but pursuing these kinds of careless relationships will leave you feeling emotionally and spiritually empty in the end." Upon the Duggar girls laying out all the reasons as to why courtship is the biblical way to find a life partner, they then segue into official courtship and its parameters. They explain that once a young man has received the approval from both sets of parents to proceed, then the couple can enter into an official courtship. Keep in mind that oftentimes the courtship proceeds without the couple ever having had one-on-one conversations or being alone together in any capacity. It's also important to note that according to Bill Gothards standards, a couple cannot enter into an official courtship without the complete, unreserved permission from both sets of parents. No matter their age, a couple needs the absolute permission from their parents. If they do not have this permission, then they cannot proceed. In no way, shape, or form are they to go out from under the authority of their parents. If they do this, then they are disobeying their God-given authorities, which according to Gothard is the ultimate sin. For Jinger and her siblings, courtship was and still is the most famous application of Gothard's principles in their lives. In her book, she writes that it was the most talked about aspect of their show and in their lives. To Jinger, courtship was a normal, healthy way to live out the principles of design and authority. She writes, "Courtship is the process through which a young man and woman go from being friends to spouses. Two people don't enter a courtship unless they are considering marriage. This process means parents decide if their daughters can get to know a particular man, and the parents have the final say over whether or not the daughter and suitor can get married." Growing up, courtship was all Jinger ever knew. Now that she has distanced herself from the belief system that her family still practices, she now has a different understanding and opinion regarding courtship. In her book, she writes how unfair and damaging it can be. Quote, "It's different for sons than daughters. It seems like they have more freedom than the girls. Most of the time within this culture, a young man can pursue a girl and decide if he wants to marry her. The parents have input, but they aren't as involved throughout the process. For my sisters and me, this process didn't mean we had no say in who we were going to marry. Rather, it meant that young men who were interested in a relationship with me had to first get my parents' approval."
For any fella who would meet your daughter and want to date her, we say that before that time even comes, for you to take your daughter out and ask her, could you commit yourself to God's best in regard to your dating and marriage decisions? And secondly, would you direct any fella who asks you to me, the father, so that I'll be able to decide whether you should go out with him? And third, if there's any discussion about marriage, would you then have him talk to me before you discuss it at all?
Jinger continues, "When they did approve and we began courting, we followed specific guidelines. We didn't go on one-on-one dates. Our time together took place at one of our family's homes, or we had a sibling tag along with us if we went shopping, to a restaurant, or went for a walk. We also didn't hold hands until we were engaged or kiss until marriage. My parents encouraged us to follow these guidelines, and I was committed to those courtship principles."
The next person you kiss will be that one that you marry on the wedding ceremony. When you can do that, and the same for you girls, that you will reserve that kiss to the one that you marry. As I was a high schooler, even before high school, I was blessed with 2 older sisters. And when I saw how important the kiss was for them, for a fella it's just a, casual, but to a girl, it's a special token of affection and commitment.
Upon Ginger's departure from the IBLP, she has had time to reflect, reassess, and re-examine her upbringing and what she had helped promote to the masses. Jinger writes that during her adolescent years, while living at home and abiding by her parents' belief system and guidelines, she was a walking billboard for courtship along with her family. Internally, however, she experienced a lot of shame and fear. She kept a journal where she would frequently document her struggles. She writes, "In my journal marked July 22nd, 2015, I wrote the following excerpt. We went to the courtship class at church. I was so greatly convicted by the message talking about the dating spirit. I am so guilty in this area. This morning, I was thinking about all of the wrongs it seems like I've been getting myself wrapped up in. Saddened and so sick of this state, asking God for answers. The past few days, I have had a flood of thoughts about a young man. I was wisely encouraged to have a prayer target, so when the temptation comes to dwell on such thoughts, I'm going to stop and pray for my sister. What Satan meant for evil, God used for good. I saw attraction as being a distraction. I was so afraid of having a dating spirit that there were times when I wouldn't even talk to a young man I might have been attracted to. Any thoughts of attraction, I viewed them as being evil and from Satan. I needed to fight against them, resist them with prayer. I was so afraid of defrauding guys or giving away my heart that I thought it was safer to avoid them altogether. I now see how harmful that view was. Today I recognize that there were real problems with how I thought about relationships between guys and girls."
Yeah, and it was like every little thing, like, oh no, I had this thought in my heart, this thing in my mind, or God forbid I ever had attraction for a young man. I thought of it as like a sin thing. Like, I was like, I have to tell my mom right now. Otherwise, I felt like I wasn't going to be okay, which is like, it's such a normal thing to have that attraction. And it's not like, I almost felt guilty. I wrote down a couple interesting journal entries over that because I felt almost like I was sinning for having attraction for a young man. And I was a single girl. And it was like, this guy, I really love how he loves the Lord. Oh no, I've given my heart away.
Was it happening in other Gothard families to your knowledge, this obsession with confession, so to speak?
I think within our circle, I remember like going to the Lord's Supper and that being a thing within the families. They would take 2 to 3, 4 hours, break off into families, go talk, and then they would come back and some of them would take maybe 1 or 2 would take the Lord's Supper out of their family of 10 kids.
According to Jinger, the process of finding a life partner through courtship is extremely monitored and controlled by the parents, giving little room for the guys and girls to have any say. Jinger writes about this in her book. Quote, "Courtship can become so highly controlled by parents, regulated and overseen, that it doesn't allow for a certain level of openness and vulnerability. There was a practical problem with courting, and my fear of having a dating spirit when it came to my relationship with Jeremy. My determination to guard my heart made it difficult for Jeremy to figure out whether I liked him. When Jeremy and I did begin our relationship, we felt a lot of pressure. We didn't know each other well, yet from the moment we started talking on the phone, there was an expectation of marriage. That can be emotionally challenging. It was for me. When my dad gave Jeremy and me permission to court, I wasn't yet convinced I wanted to marry him. I loved being around him, I respected him, but I didn't know him well enough to say whether or not I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. After all, we hadn't had a lot of in-depth conversations. Our courtship sometimes made it tough to have those necessary conversations in an informal setting. When we were with each other in person, we had a chaperone. Instead of enjoying our time together, we skipped the friendship stage and went straight to the are we going to marry stage. Looking back, I see how important that friendship stage is because friendship is such an important part of marriage."
What is the definition of a date? Well, technically, when the emotions of a boy or a girl begin to be attached to each other, any activity together becomes a date. This includes a phone call, eating together, going to church, writing to each other, anything. That's why up until this point, you want to have the phrase attention to all without intention on any. And whenever it begins to be an intention upon one person, then that becomes the basis for that courtship. Not dating, but courtship. When both sets of parents believe that this is the one.
In the book, A Matter of Basic Principles, the authors, who are Christians, have spent decades researching, dissecting, and challenging Gothards' teachings. In their book, there's a section called The Courtship Game, where they dispute Gothards' standards on courtship. One of the problems they have with Gothards' courtship standards is the fact that he encourages his followers to make haste. They write, Gothard teaches that once the actual period of courtship begins, it should be as short as possible. This comes from Gothards' interpretation of 1 Corinthians 7:32-34, where Paul says that a single person should focus on pleasing the Lord, while a married person focuses on pleasing one spouse. Based on these scriptures, ripped from their context, Gothard concluded that we ought to work on keeping courtship as short as possible. This raises a practical problem. How are two people who are to be married supposed to get to know each other in such a brief period of time? Gothards' answer is that they get to know each other primarily through getting to know the parents. The flaw here is that while a young man may learn facts about a girl from the girl's parents, he can only truly know her through a relationship with her personally. We cannot assume the principle of like father, like son, since there may be a world of difference between parents and their offspring.
And then, of course, some of you say, well, how do you learn about a fellow if you don't date? Real simple. Ask his sisters. Ask her brothers. Ask her sisters about her. You'll learn all you need to know. In fact, more than you want to know. And furthermore, as you work in a group and have group activities, then he's not on best behavior. You can observe him in opportunities where he kind of like letting you know how he really is. There are so many. What's amazing to me is that many of those who get into a marriage or decide they like somebody, and I ask them, on what basis did you make this decision that you've dated this girl and you want to marry her? And you know what the decisions, they base them on decisions that will change, on conditions that will change.
In their book, the authors argue that Gothards' definition, rules, and standards for courtship are unbiblical, unfair, unreasonable, unworkable, and ultimately unwise. They write, Gothard cites Solomon, David, and Samson as examples that those who were the most qualified to choose their own life partners brought sorrow into their lives when they tried to do so. He expresses this in his Establishing Biblical Standards of Courtship workbook, page 6. This is fallacious because it assumes that making wrong choices makes choosing wrong. As a matter of fact, the narratives of David and Samson both show that there were problems in their characters before the introduction of foreign women. These character flaws influenced their personal decisions and led them to make errors that came back to haunt them. But that's the world of free will. It is always destructive when the will of God is usurped and put into the hands of human control and administration. The basic principle on which Gothards' courtship hinges is that one fallible human decides the will of God and imposes it upon another. It isn't the man or woman who is getting married, but additional mediators between them and God. The basic assumption that the parents who serve as mediators between God and their offspring will correctly perceive the Lord's will on the matter of whom their son or daughter should marry just does not hold water. We know of 30-year-olds who are still living at home because they haven't been given permission to leave home or marry. Parents who adopt Gothards' destructive views will develop guilt-prone people who do not have self-government or autonomy. Gothards' teachings create repression. Another consideration is this. In Bible times, most people had arranged marriages, yet those unions were far from perfect. David's marriage to Michal was arranged by her father Saul. Yet the Bible does not portray this union as a roaring success. The fact that the Bible mentions how people in those days prepared for marriage does not constitute command for us to do it that way. Was polygamy God's plan for marriage, since so many biblical marriages are portrayed as polygamous? In the end, the authors highly discourage people from following Gothards' courtship game, as they find it to be destructive and problematic.
You know, one of the chief verses that on this matter of dating around versus courtship is, it says in 1 Corinthians 7, if you're single, you are to see how you can please the Lord. And if you're married, you better see how you can please your wife or your husband. Now, who do you please when you're dating? Now, just appreciate two young people that I asked that question to just during our last break. And both of them said, you know, that makes sense. Never thought of that. But you can't please two masters. Now that is the scriptural basis for why dating isn't right.
Jinger was once adamant that courtship was a fundamental necessity to finding a life partner. With her family, she mentored many young girls, teaching them about courtship and encouraging them to follow a system she now feels is toxic and damaging. In her book, Jinger offers an apology and writes how deeply regretful she feels for promoting and marketing Gothards' teachings. She writes, "While our family was on the road, young girls would often introduce themselves and ask us for advice. Many of them were trying to figure out how to navigate relationships with parents, friends, and of course, boys. Our book was all about relationships. In the book, I explained how Gothards' 7 basic principles applied to my life. I discussed the umbrella of authority, why girls should dress a certain way, avoid different kinds of music, and watch out for witchcraft in movies. In the spring of 2014, my sisters and I went on a book tour to promote our book, which was a bestseller. We met a lot of young girls at each stop. Most thanked me for the show or book. Many told me they started wearing long skirts because we wore them on the show. Others told me they planned to court instead of date, when it was time to consider marriage. At the time, nearly all these conversations encouraged me. They made me feel like I was making a difference. Because of us, lives were being changed. Young girls were becoming more modest, pure, and virtuous. Today, I'd have a much different message for those girls and a much different response than when they told me about the external changes they made because of the show and our book. I wish I could tell them that I should not have emphasized man-made rules so much in my first book. I would try to help them understand that the Christian life is about Christ. It's not about clothes, dating guidelines, or music. I'd point them to Romans 14:17 to remind them that the kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit.
Like a bird out of prison that's taking its flight, like a blind man that God gave back his sight, like a poor wretched beggar that's unfortunate fame. I'm so glad that I found out that he could bring me out through his holy name. Thank God I am free, free, free from this world of sin. I've been washed in the blood of Jesus. I've been born again. Hallelujah, I'm saved, saved, saved by his wonderful grace. I'm so glad that I found out that he could bring me out to show me the way. I'm so glad that I found out that he could bring me out and show me